Hannah William was the kind of woman who seemed to have it all together. At 38, she had built a successful career as a real estate agent, becoming one of the top sellers in her region. Her clients admired her not only for her professional acumen but also for her warmth and dedication. Hannah had a natural ability to make people feel comfortable and valued, a skill that served her well both in her job and in her personal life. Born and raised in the small town of Brooksville, Hannah was a familiar face to many. She had grown up in a modest home, the daughter of a school teacher and a mechanic. Her upbringing instilled in her a strong work ethic and a deep sense of community. She was known to participate in local events, volunteer at the community center, and support various charitable causes. Despite her professional success, Hannah's personal life had been a roller coaster. She married young, to her high school sweetheart, Michael Evans. Together they had a daughter, Amelia. However, the marriage ended in a bitter divorce when Amelia was just 5 years old. The split left Hannah determined to provide a stable and loving environment for her daughter. It was a few years after her divorce that Hannah met Greg William, a local entrepreneur. Greg was charming and ambitious, running his own small but growing business. He had a magnetic personality, and it wasn't long before he swept Hannah off her feet. Their courtship was swift, and they married within a year of meeting. To outsiders, they appeared to be the perfect couple, embodying the promise of second chances and new beginnings. Hannah poured her heart into blending their family. She worked hard to ensure that Amelia felt secure and loved, even as she navigated the complexities of having a new stepfather. Greg, for his part, appeared to be a doting husband and stepfather, often seen attending Amelia's school events and family gatherings. Life for the Williams seemed picture-perfect. Their home, a charming two-story house on Maple Street, was often the envy of their friends and neighbors. The house was always well-kept, filled with laughter, and adorned with photos of happy moments, vacations, birthdays, holidays, and more. Hannah's friends often remarked on how she managed to balance her demanding career with her roles as wife and mother so effortlessly. Amelia, now 16, was a typical teenager. She was smart and driven, qualities she inherited from her mother. However, adolescence brought its own set of challenges. Amelia's relationship with Hannah was marked by typical teenage rebellion and occasional clashes over curfews, friends, and schoolwork. Despite these, Hannah's love for Amelia was unwavering, and she always tried to bridge the gap between them with patience and understanding. Yet, beneath this seemingly perfect facade, not everything was as it appeared. There were moments when Hannah felt a creeping unease, a sense that something was amiss. Greg, who had once been so attentive and loving, started becoming more distant. He worked late more often and seemed preoccupied even when he was at home. Hannah brushed off her concerns, attributing them to the pressures of his growing business. Amelia, too, had become more withdrawn. She spent more time in her room, her phone constantly in hand. Hannah noticed the changes but assumed they were typical teenage behaviors, not suspecting that her daughter was harboring secrets of her own. Hannah's professional life remained a bright spot amid her growing personal concerns. She was deeply respected in Brooksville, not only for her real estate prowess but also for her genuine care for the community. She had helped many families find their dream homes and was always ready to lend a hand to those in need. Her colleagues admired her tenacity and her clients appreciated her honesty. Every year, Hannah organized a charity drive to support local shelters and food banks, an initiative that had become a staple event in Brooksville. Her involvement in these causes earned her numerous accolades and a reputation as a pillar of the community. As Hannah juggled her responsibilities, she remained hopeful that whatever tensions existed in her family would eventually resolve. She believed in the strength of love and commitment, and she was determined to hold her family together. But beneath the surface, the undercurrents of betrayal and deception were growing stronger, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shatter the peace of Brooksville and unravel the very fabric of Hannah's life. It was a crisp autumn morning in Brooksville, the kind of morning that Hannah William would have loved. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and red, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fall through the air. But on this particular day, the beauty of the season was overshadowed by a sense of foreboding. Hannah's colleague, Mia Johnson, had been trying to reach her since the previous evening. They had an important meeting scheduled that morning with a high-profile client looking to purchase a property. Hannah's absence was unusual. She was always punctual and professional. When Hannah failed to show up at the office, Mia decided to stop by her house to check on her. As Mia approached the William residence, she noticed something was off. The front door was slightly ajar, an unusual sight given Hannah's meticulous nature. Hesitant but concerned, Mia called out Hannah's name as she stepped inside. The house was eerily silent, the usual warmth and vibrancy absent. Mia's heart pounded as she ventured further into the house. The living room was in disarray, with furniture overturned and a broken lamp on the floor. A sense of dread filled her as she made her way to the kitchen, where she encountered a scene that would haunt her forever. Hannah lay motionless on the cold tile floor, her body covered in blood. She had been brutally stabbed multiple times, and her lifeless eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. The room was a chaotic mess, with blood spattered across the walls and floor. A broken wine glass lay near her hand, and the knife used in the attack was discarded nearby. Overwhelmed with shock and horror, Mia stumbled back, her breath coming in short gasps. She fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, her voice shaking as she described the scene to the dispatcher. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air, and the once quiet street was soon bustling with police cars and emergency responders. Detective Mark Rogers was the first to arrive, followed closely by his partner, Detective Linda Hayes. Both seasoned investigators, they quickly assessed the scene. Mark's face hardened as he took in the brutality of the attack, while Linda's eyes reflected a mix of determination and sorrow. As the detectives began their work, neighbors gathered outside, whispering in hushed tones. Brooksville was a small town where everyone knew each other, and the news of Hannah's murder spread like wildfire. The community was in shock. Hannah was a beloved figure, and the idea that someone would harm her was unthinkable. Mia, still in a state of shock, was taken aside by an officer to provide a statement. She recounted her attempts to reach Hannah, her growing concern, and the horrifying discovery. Her hands trembled as she spoke, and tears streamed down her face. Detective Rogers and Detective Hayes methodically secured the crime scene, ensuring that every piece of potential evidence was preserved. Forensic technicians arrived to collect samples, take photographs, and document the scene in painstaking detail. Blood samples, fingerprints, and the discarded knife were among the key pieces of evidence collected. Rogers directed his team with precision, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. He knew that the first 48 hours of an investigation were critical, and the thoroughness of their initial work could make or break the case. Hayes interviewed neighbors, gathering any information they might have about the events leading up to the murder. As the day wore on, the detectives began to piece together a rough timeline of the crime. The overturned furniture and signs of struggle suggested that Hannah had fought her attacker. The broken wine glass indicated that she might have been caught off guard while relaxing at home. Interviews with neighbors revealed that several of them had heard raised voices coming from the William residence the previous evening. Some mentioned seeing Greg's car parked in the driveway late at night, which was unusual given his claim of being away on business. Detective Hayes took on the difficult task of informing Greg and Amelia about Hannah's death. Greg, who had been at his office, arrived home looking visibly distraught. He was led away from the scene by officers to provide a statement. Amelia, who was at school, was picked up by a police officer and brought home. The news of her mother's murder hit her hard, and she broke down in tears upon hearing it. Both Greg and Amelia were taken to the police station for questioning. Their reactions would be closely scrutinized as the investigation continued, with detectives keenly aware that initial interviews often provided crucial insights. As night fell, Brooksville was left reeling from the day's events. Candles and flowers began to appear on the Williams' front lawn, a makeshift memorial for Hannah. The community's grief was palpable, and a sense of unease settled over the town. The murder of Hannah William was not just a tragic loss, it was a wake-up call for Brooksville. Behind the closed doors of seemingly perfect homes, dark secrets and hidden tensions festered. As the investigation unfolded, these secrets would come to light, revealing a web of deceit and betrayal that would shock everyone. Detective Mark Rogers and Detective Linda Hayes knew they were facing a complex and deeply personal case. Hannah Williams' murder wasn't just a random act of violence, it was an intimate crime, committed by someone close to her. Their first step was to gather all available evidence and begin interviewing those closest to Hannah. The detectives set up their base of operations in the William house, converting the dining room into a temporary command center. They pored over the initial crime scene reports, reviewing the evidence collected and the statements given by neighbors and Mia Johnson. The forensic team worked tirelessly, analyzing the blood samples, fingerprints, and the broken wine glass found at the scene. The knife, covered in both Hannah's and another person's blood, was a crucial piece of evidence. They also examined Hannah's phone, looking for any clues in her recent communications. The initial analysis revealed no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Hannah had known her attacker and willingly let them into the house. The struggle indicated that she had fought back, but the brutality of the attack pointed to a crime of passion. Detective Hayes took the lead on interviewing Greg William. Greg sat in the interrogation room, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. Hayes began with the basics, asking him to recount his whereabouts the previous evening. Greg claimed he had been at a business meeting in a neighboring town and had returned home late. He insisted he found the house empty and went straight to bed, assuming Hannah was working late or out with friends. His alibi seemed plausible, but there were inconsistencies. The neighbors had seen his car in the driveway earlier than he claimed to have returned. Next, Hayes interviewed Amelia Evans. The teenager was visibly shaken, her eyes red from crying. Hayes approached her gently, aware of the trauma she was experiencing. Amelia confirmed she had been at a friend's house, returning home around midnight. She claimed she hadn't noticed anything unusual, as she went straight to her room. Detective Rogers focused on the broader picture, reviewing Hannah's phone records and diary entries. The phone records showed numerous late-night calls and text messages between Greg and Amelia, raising suspicions about the nature of their relationship. The diary entries, while not explicit, hinted at growing tension between Hannah and her husband, as well as concerns about Amelia's behavior. Interviews with friends and colleagues provided more context. Mia Johnson mentioned that Hannah had confided in her about feeling increasingly isolated in her marriage. A breakthrough came when the forensic team discovered fingerprints on the wine glass that didn't match either Hannah or Greg. Further analysis identified them as belonging to Amelia. This discovery led to a more in-depth examination of her activities and relationships. Rogers and Hayes re-interviewed Amelia's friends, uncovering a crucial piece of information from Rachel Cooper, Amelia's best friend. Rachel hesitated before revealing that Amelia had been involved in a secret affair with Greg. According to Rachel, Amelia had been increasingly anxious and paranoid about her mother discovering the truth. With this new information, the detectives began to piece together a disturbing narrative. Greg and Amelia's illicit relationship had created a volatile situation in the William household. Hannah, likely aware of the affair, had become a threat to their secret. The evidence pointed towards a confrontation that escalated into violence. The hidden camera footage from the living room provided the final link. It showed a heated argument between Hannah, Greg, and Amelia the night of the murder. The footage captured Hannah accusing them of betrayal, Greg attempting to calm her down, and Amelia, in a fit of rage, grabbing the knife from the kitchen. Detective Rogers and Detective Hayes knew they had to proceed carefully. They gathered all the evidence, ensuring their case was airtight before making any arrests. They obtained search warrants for Greg's and Amelia's phones, uncovering further incriminating messages that detailed their affair and discussed their fears of Hannah's reaction. The detectives also brought in a forensic psychologist, Dr. Laura Mitchell, to profile the dynamics within the William family. Dr. Mitchell's analysis supported the theory of a crime of passion, driven by fear, guilt, and the desperate desire to keep their affair hidden. With the evidence mounting, Rogers and Hayes prepared to make their move. They coordinated with the district attorney to ensure they had strong grounds for the arrests and subsequent prosecution. The case was complex, involving layers of deceit and emotional turmoil that required careful handling. They first arrested Greg William at his office, taking him into custody without incident. Greg's expression was a mix of resignation and defiance, knowing the evidence against him was overwhelming. Next, they apprehended Amelia at school, a heartbreaking scene that left her friends and teachers in shock. The news of the arrest spread quickly through Brooksville, deepening the community's grief and disbelief. The once respected Greg William was now seen as a manipulative predator, and Amelia, a confused and manipulated teenager, became a tragic figure in a dark and twisted tale. As the investigation moved towards the trial, the detectives remained focused on uncovering every detail. They were determined to bring justice for Hannah William, whose life had been brutally cut short by the very people she loved and trusted. Detective Linda Hayes sat across from Greg William in the interrogation room, observing him closely. Greg, 42, had the appearance of a man accustomed to control. His sharp suit, meticulously combed hair, and steely gaze spoke volumes. Despite his calm demeanor, beads of sweat formed on his brow as Hayes began her questioning. "Mr. William, can you walk us through your whereabouts on the night of your wife's murder?" Hayes asked, her tone professional but firm. Greg recounted his version of events. He claimed to have been at a business dinner in a neighboring town, returning home late to find the house dark and quiet. He insisted he went straight to bed, assuming Hannah was either working late or out with friends. Hayes noted the inconsistencies with the neighbor's security footage showing his car arriving earlier than he stated. Greg's calm facade cracked slightly under the pressure of the detective's relentless questioning. "You're lying, Greg," Hayes finally said, sliding a series of photos across the table, timestamps from the security footage and screenshots of incriminating texts between him and Amelia. "We have proof you were home earlier. Explain this." Greg's face turned pale. He stammered, trying to weave a plausible story, but the evidence was overwhelming. The once charismatic businessman now seemed like a trapped animal. Detective Mark Rogers had the delicate task of interviewing Amelia Evans. The 16-year-old sat in a small, dimly lit room, her hands trembling. Rogers approached her with a gentler touch, aware of the trauma and manipulation she had endured. "Amelia, we're trying to understand what happened," Rogers began softly. "We know about your relationship with Greg. We need to hear your side of the story." Amelia's eyes filled with tears as she recounted her relationship with Greg. It began with innocent compliments and quickly escalated into a secret affair. She described feeling special and loved, emotions that soon turned into fear and guilt. She revealed how Greg had convinced her that Hannah discovering their relationship would destroy everything. "He said she'd ruin our lives," Amelia sobbed. "He said we had to do something." Rogers leaned in, his voice calm and reassuring. "Did you feel pressure to act, Amelia? Did Greg ask you to hurt your mother?" Amelia nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "He made me believe it was the only way. I didn't want to, but I was so scared. I didn't know what else to do." The detectives briefly considered other suspects, including Hannah's ex-husband, Michael Evans. Michael had a history of volatile behavior and had recently fought for custody of Amelia. However, his alibi was solid, and there was no direct connection to the events on the night of the murder. Interviews with Michael and his associates yielded no credible leads, reinforcing the focus on Greg and Amelia. As more evidence emerged, the detectives painted a clearer picture of Greg's manipulative nature. Testimonies from colleagues and friends described Greg as charming but controlling. He had a reputation for getting what he wanted, often at the expense of others. Mia Johnson's testimony was particularly revealing. She recounted several conversations with Hannah, who had confided her suspicions about Greg's behavior. Hannah had felt increasingly isolated, sensing something was terribly wrong but unable to pinpoint the source. The detectives compiled the digital and physical evidence, building a comprehensive case. The texts and emails between Greg and Amelia showed a clear pattern of manipulation and fear. Greg had consistently reassured Amelia, suggesting they needed to take drastic measures to protect their secret. "If she finds out, our lives are over," one message read. "We have to do something." The voice memos Amelia had recorded detailed her growing anxiety and Greg's coercive tactics. In one particularly chilling memo, Amelia's voice trembled as she described a conversation with Greg. "He said this is the only way," she whispered. "I don't want to, but I can't lose him." As the details of the investigation became public, Brooksville was thrown into turmoil. Greg William, once a pillar of the community, was now vilified. Opinions on Amelia were divided. Some saw her as a victim of Greg's manipulation, while others viewed her as equally culpable. Vigils were held in memory of Hannah William, her friends and family struggling to comprehend the depth of the betrayal. The community's grief was palpable, a somber backdrop to the unfolding drama. Local news outlets covered the story extensively, with headlines like "Respected Businessman Turns Killer," "The Greg Williams Scandal," and "Teenage Lover or Manipulated Victim." The Amelia Evans story. The case captivated the town and the nation, everyone eager to see justice served. With Greg's manipulation exposed and Amelia's confession providing critical insight, the detectives were confident in their case. They had pieced together the tragic sequence of events leading to Hannah's murder, driven by a toxic mix of fear, love, and desperation. As they prepared for the next phase, they knew the courtroom would be the stage for the final act of this harrowing story. The complex dynamics between Greg, Amelia, and Hannah highlighted the devastating consequences of deceit and manipulation. The trial promised to be a dramatic and emotional reckoning, with the fates of Greg and Amelia hanging in the balance. The community of Brooksville braced for the legal battle ahead, united in their hope for justice for Hannah Williams. The district attorney's office, led by prosecutor Karen Thompson, meticulously prepared the case for trial. Thompson knew that the emotional weight of the case and the community's interest would make this a highly scrutinized trial. She ensured that every piece of evidence, from the forensic analysis to the digital communications, was organized to present a clear and compelling narrative. Greg's defense team, led by the experienced attorney Robert Mason, planned to argue that Greg had no direct involvement in the murder. They intended to paint Amelia as an unstable teenager who acted out of jealousy and impulsiveness. Mason's strategy hinged on discrediting Amelia's confession and creating doubt about Greg's role. The trial of Greg Williams and Amelia Evans began with intense media coverage. The courtroom was filled with reporters, community members, and friends of the Williams, all eager to see justice served. Prosecutor Thompson opened with a powerful statement, outlining the betrayal and manipulation that led to Hannah Williams' tragic death. Amelia's defense team, appointed by the state, focused on her vulnerability and Greg's influence over her. They aimed to show that while Amelia was involved, she was not the mastermind behind the crime. Her lawyer, Emily Foster, highlighted Amelia's emotional turmoil and the pressure she faced from Greg. Thompson methodically presented the evidence. The jury saw the recovered digital messages, listened to Amelia's voice memos, and watched the hidden camera footage showing the confrontation between Hannah, Greg, and Amelia. Forensic experts testified about the blood evidence and the timeline, corroborating the sequence of events leading to the murder. A pivotal moment came when Mia Johnson took the stand, recounting her discovery of Hannah's body and her close relationship with the victim. Her emotional testimony reinforced the brutality of the crime and the personal betrayal involved. Greg's attorney, Robert Mason, cross-examined witnesses, attempting to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. He argued that the digital messages were open to interpretation and that Amelia's confession was coerced under duress. Mason portrayed Greg as a man caught in a tragic situation, manipulated by a troubled teenager. Emily Foster, representing Amelia, focused on her client's psychological state. She brought in a forensic psychologist who testified about Amelia's vulnerability and the impact of Greg's manipulation. Foster's strategy aimed to mitigate Amelia's culpability, emphasizing her role as a victim in the toxic relationship. In closing arguments, Prosecutor Thompson reminded the jury of the overwhelming evidence against Greg and the clear motive driven by the illicit affair. She urged them to see through the defense's attempts to obscure the truth. Mason and Foster, in their closing statements, reiterated their clients' narratives, seeking to create reasonable doubt. After deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Greg Williams was found guilty of second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Amelia Evans was found guilty of manslaughter, recognizing her involvement but also considering her manipulated state. Greg was sentenced to life in prison, while Amelia received a 15-year sentence with the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a measure of closure to the community of Brooksville. While justice was served, the town remained haunted by the tragic events that unfolded within the Williams household. The trial underscored the devastating consequences of betrayal and manipulation, leaving a lasting impact on all who were touched by the tragedy. A truth in crime case solvers. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe.